Aloha, I'm Lila Mower, President of Kokua Council. Welcome to our second session on affordable housing. Housing is at the center of many of Hawaii's most pressing problems. Because of the lack of housing or lack of affordable housing, we lose many of our essential workers, teachers, first responders, healthcare workers, so forth and so on. Today, we have an opportunity to listen to 5 panelists who are very active in housing. And we are going to start with State Representative Diamond Garcia. So Diamond, if you would please present your proposals, your ideas, we'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila, and thank you so much to the Kokua Council for having me here to represent the minority point of view, the House Republican point of view. Affordable housing has been a topic of conversation for decades here in Hawaii, and yet each year the possibility of buying a home for local families seems to get further and further out of reach. One party has controlled the state and the legislature for so long, and dialogue and solutions in combating the increase of housing costs have been controlled by one party, yet the problem continues to worsen. We need different solutions to solve Hawaii's housing crisis. Just this last census result showed for the first time ever, there are more Native Hawaiians living on the US continent than here in Hawaii. About 65,000 more Hawaiians live in the mainland than here in Hawaii. That's a problem. And we, the House GOP caucus, believe that throwing money at the problem is not the solution. We have record tax surplus, and yet leaders here in the building continue to find ways to spend down more money and increase the size of government. It's time to cut red tape to reduce the burdensome regulations that Hawaii currently imposes and allow development to happen with cheaper costs. Our caucus has proposed multiple bills with real solutions to combat Hawaii's housing crisis. So thank you once again for the opportunity to be here. Some of the issues that we've focused on is House Bill, let me see here, it's House Bill 634, which would create a pre-tax savings account. So when you get your paycheck, if the bill passed, of course it's dead now, but if the bill did pass, a person could set aside money from their monthly paycheck to go to a savings account to go towards down payment. One of the biggest hurdles for most local families is not the mortgage cost, because oftentimes mortgage is cheaper than the monthly rental cost. The problem is money for a down payment. Local families just can't drop $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. It's a struggle. And so we're trying to assist people to move from rentals into home ownership. Hawaii has the highest amount of rental population in the entire country and the lowest home ownership in the entire country. And we believe that getting people into a mortgage is super important. Why? Because their housing cost is locked in for 30 years. As each year goes by, inflation rises, rental costs will always go up. But if people are locked into a mortgage, their housing cost is locked in for 30 years. And that's the best solution for local families, is buying a home here in Hawaii. Also, we propose House Bill 632. Now, this one is specific to Hawaiian homelands. As the party of Prince Kuhio, we are very focused on trying to make sure that Hawaiians and natives stay here on the soil. So this bill would simply modernize the Hawaiian homes lease so that they can take that lease to the bank. Any normal lease with such long time periods, in this case for Hawaiian homelands, a 100-year lease should have value. Unfortunately, it currently does not have value. So they get the lease, but they can't qualify for a mortgage. Their credit score is bad. And so they go back down to the bottom of that list and hope and pray that in 5, 10, 15 years, when their name is called, they'll be able to qualify. So what we're proposing is, let's modernize the Hawaiian homelands lease so that once their name is called, they can take it to the bank because there's so much time, there's value there, and they can get into a mortgage and their family can be grounded on the Aina, grounded here in Hawaii for generations to come. This last week, we all saw Iam Tongi on our wonderful show, American Idol, where he said, unfortunately, he's from Kahuku, but currently lives in Seattle. with his family. Why? Because his family was priced out of paradise. This story is so true for thousands and thousands of local families. They've been living here trying to work so hard, but unfortunately, government is so big. 1/3 of our whole paycheck goes back to the government and taxes. It's time to cut taxes, cut the cost of living, and shrink the size of government to keep local families here in Hawaii. So I look forward to the wonderful discussion today, and thank you again for having me here.
Thank you.
Oh, Diamond. All right, next we have, let me see, our State Chief Housing Officer, Nani Medeiros. Nani?
Thank you, Lila. Aloha, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Happy to be here and looking forward to hearing more from the other panelists and their ideas and questions from all of you. So I am the state's Chief Housing Officer. It's a new position that Governor Green created. I help to create, drive, and implement the Green administration's housing plans and strategies, from housing that addresses homelessness all the way up to workforce housing. We do have a state governor's coordinator on homelessness, that is James Koshiba. The way that he and I in our work intersect and interact is if there's a housing element to something addressing homelessness, I will be involved. All other things that are really programmatic and support service oriented, that's James's kuleana. Okay, so I'm going to dive right in here and talk about a bit of our priorities. Our plans currently have 10 pillars. I don't have time to go through all of them, so I'm just going to highlight the ones that have really risen to the top over the last couple of months. We believe in investing in affordable housing development and housing development in general. We believe that with a surplus like the one that we have, this is the time to do it. The way that we recommend doing that is to help pay for infrastructure. So way back 20, 30 years ago, infrastructure was paid for by governments. And then government started using infrastructure as a condition to approve housing project applications, requiring roads, requiring parks, requiring schools, which ultimately is a burden put on the cost on the home buyer or the renter. It's not being paid for by the developer. They're not just eating that cost. It gets built right into the price of the home or the price of the rental. And we believe that that should change, because in effect, you're making our people pay twice for infrastructure, first in their taxes that they pay, and second, when they try and purchase a home or get into a new rental. So we have recommended $500 million be invested in the Dwelling Unit Revolving Fund, which is a fund within the state's Rental Housing Development Agency, known as the HHFDC. I'm just going to use the acronym. This fund is very unique in that it can be used for a number of things. It can be used for infrastructure. It can be used for pre-development loans, which is another thing that we are supporting. Pre-development loans would help a lot of our smaller companies, from your architect and engineer and everyone on the design team, get to the table and be able to do more affordable housing projects and bid on affordable housing projects. When they have to front all that design cost without knowing if they're even going to get the award, it's a lot. It can be anywhere from $1 to $13 million, and people can't afford that, right? It's very hard for them. But if there was a loan, which that statute creates a possibility for, that can be paid back, then a lot of people would be doing affordable housing projects all day long. The third unique thing it can do is gap financing. And this, in a time where our construction costs have hugely, greatly increased since COVID, partly due to material shortages, partly due to shipping, partly due to inflation. All of those things have really caused construction costs to increase so much that now projects that thought they were financed and fine over the last 2 years are finding themselves in trouble. So gap financing, also as a loan, would help address some of that need within the building industry. The other thing about the Dwelling Unit Revolving Fund is that it can be used for projects that are not 201H projects. It can be used for any project. So we can help all kinds of affordable housing projects, not just ones that the state development agency, HHFDC, is sponsoring. We can help the counties. We can help private nonprofits who want to build affordable housing on the property that they own. We can help churches. So we think that this is a great tool to invest in with some of the surplus funding and help to support the development of affordable housing for our people. Second, one of our priorities is to modernize the system. So there are a lot of, Rep Garcia kind of alluded to this, there's a lot of regulatory issues, there's duplication of services. There are agencies that were created in the 60s and 70s whose processes have never been updated, and it's 2023. There are state agencies that touch housing that don't have digitized records and the capability for people to communicate with them digitally. We think that a massive sort of very comprehensive evaluation of all of the agencies that touch housing, both at the state and county levels, need to happen. I'm talking about Land Use Commission, I'm talking about Commission on Water Resource Management, agencies within the Department of Health, SHIP-D, and our county supporting agencies, burial councils, DPP planning, departments at the county levels. Counties had evolved, I think, a couple of decades after we had established things like the Land Use Commission, as an example. So we really do think it's time, it's a whole nother century we're living in, for us to reevaluate and modernize the system as a whole, and see what we can do on that level, just through systems process, and system efficiencies to allow for the faster development of affordable housing and more development of affordable housing. The third important element of our plan is transparency and communication. We are advocating for cost-benefit analysis for all policies that affect housing at the state level, at the legislative level, and at the county levels with county councils. When bills and ordinances are being passed and becoming law that create mandates that add additional costs to housing, we believe that our people should know. As an example, there was a bill passed in Honolulu a few years ago, which has added anywhere between $25,000 to $60,000 per unit, per house. And the people should have been able to, I think, know that before that bill was adopted and passed by our county council. So we're calling for cost benefit analyses for all of those items. We're also calling them for any code changes. So our state energy office, our state building code council, when they want to adopt or change codes, we want a cost benefit analysis that's going to say exactly what the financial impact is going to be to the cost of housing. Is it direct? Is it indirect? And what is that number? And then finally, the governor is used, in that thought, we're going to make this information transparent. Our desire is to have transparency in what government is doing to add to the cost ourselves, and then communicating that to the public and letting the public know. And then our emergency proclamation. So governor has issued an emergency proclamation on homelessness. Many of you probably saw him sign it at the State of the State. And that is a very particular EP in that it's very targeted to housing projects that are addressing homelessness. That's it. The James Kushiba is currently working on administrative rules to help with establish some type of process for projects that want to fall under that emergency proclamation. We've got a second EP coming up that will be specific to affordable housing. And I am currently working on that draft with our Attorney General. Once we have we're on our third or fourth draft right now. And this next draft, we hope to start socializing with advocates in the community, stakeholders, legislators of our subject matter committees. And that will be another tool that will help us, along with all of these other levers, having some investment in infrastructure, having greater transparency in our processes, streamlining some of our processes, all of that together is going to help us get more housing built and hopefully lower the cost for our local people. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nani. All right. Third, let's see. Choon James, you're up, please, Choon.
Aloha, can you hear me, Lila? Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate this invitation to share a few thoughts. I have been a real estate broker for over 30 years, but I have also been a community activist, and I do have some observations. I'm not in any official decision-making responsibility, even though I have been involved with the city council for a very long time, and I ran for governor for mayor 4 years ago because I was so frustrated with the rules and policies, but obviously because I didn't have a lot of funds, didn't go too far with that adventure. Again, I'm originally also from Singapore, and I think that some of us here will still recognize that there was a time when mom and dad could have a little house and dad would work, mom would stay home, but dad would be able to afford a home, a car, and support the children and stay home. So whatever have happened to that scenario through the years, and I also want to just throw out a few things and we can talk about it. This is certainly worth more than an hour and a half, but but I certainly enjoy this privilege. Okay, we know the cheap homes in Ohio, right? Upstate New York, Indiana for 100,000 beautiful homes, but who wants to live there, right? Hawaii is also our worst enemy. We have people coming from all over, buyers from all over the world. But the island has not grown any bigger. Just in Oahu alone, 50% of our island is taken up by the mountain ranges. The population in 1950 was about 200,000, and now it's over 1 million. And then with a lot of underground visitors too, and 10 million visitors a year. And of course, we have experts saying that we have not built mass housing for a while, but we also need to recognize that our islands have not grown either. And some would say that, oh, we need 66,000 homes by 2025, or we need 22,000 or whatever it is. But the fact is that there is a lot of public rhetoric to help the people and to address affordable housing. But this conversation has been going for a very long time. So in fact, the Oahu Rail was supposed to create affordable housing, right? That was one of its main pillars. But so far, the City Council, Honolulu City Council, has approved 8 big projects through rapid permitting. Guess what? They're all luxury condos. And all in anticipation of a rail line that may never arrive in Ala Moana. So it brings us down also to what do we want Hawaii to become? Hawaii is definitely unique, it's beautiful, everyone wants to come here, but we must also recognize that we're in the middle of nowhere. We live here, you know, visitors come and go, but we live here. And the I can always agree that housing has got to be first for the people of Hawaiian ancestry, because this is their homeland. We are grateful to be welcomed into this beautiful land of Hawaii. So what are our priority people? Is the government obligated to provide home ownership or rentals for everybody? Is it for newcomers, Hawaiians, Kama'aina, first generation, second generation, people who want to retire here in their retirement because of the nice weather? But one thing we need to accept is that Hawaii cannot provide housing for everyone who wants to come here. We have to be logical, and we have to deal with the cards that we have that we are given. And again, I support the idea of DHHL, but then also the questions, right? Why can DHHL allow Hawaiians to be owner builders? Because so many of our Hawaiians, brothers and sisters, have so much construction skills, and yet everyone, it appears, is forced to go through bonded contractors, which of course increase the price 8-fold. So the good news is that we actually in Oahu and in Hawaii have a general plan. We actually have decided where, how to protect our agricultural lands, how to keep our rural areas, how to encourage high density in the Kapolei and Honolulu and that sort. So there's a lot of information out there that I'll be happy to share. And then another thing too, we cannot copycat any housing programs. I've participate in other housing conversations. For example, Singapore, where I'm from, is loved as a Singapore model. Everyone loves to talk about a Singapore model. But what we don't want to talk is about how the Singapore government works. For example, if a contractor in Singapore breaks a water line, guess who pays for it? The contractor. If there's a cost overrun, guess who is responsible for it? The contractor. So, so in essence, if you're talking about construction, the Honolulu Rail started in 2006 at 2.7 billion, and now it's 12 billion, and it's not open yet. So, and one of the, some of the other important features is that the Singapore model of affordable housing and home ownership does not have any middleman like lobbyists, developers, or unions running the agenda. And Diamond was talking about bank accounts. The Singapore government has a very robust and prosperous, what we call CPF, is Central Provident Fund. A working person has to contribute to education, health, and housing. Now, the wonderful thing about this fund is that these funds are managed so efficiently that it brings about 6% dividends income to the people. And the Singapore has invested those funds. It's not like Social Security where everybody's worrying that it's going to go bankrupt, okay? And then another thing that I want to add is that the political culture of Singapore is again very different. Again, there's no lobbyists, there's no developers catering to the agenda. And here in Hawaii, obviously, we know that if you have a lot of money and if you have a lot of campaign money backing you, most probably you're going to win, right? So let's go back to the workforce housing again. Even if we're talking about workforce housing, who is it for and what?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to give other people a chance. Can you wrap up your?
All right, so there are many questions that we can discuss about it. I think that there should be no sacred cows. We should just talk about it and have fun with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rep Peruso, Amy, are you there?
Sure.
Oh, there you are. Thank you.
So I guess I'll just start by talking about a central premise of my work in the legislature since I've begun. When I was active with HSTA, we initiated a constitutional amendment campaign, which was it was called Conam for Keiki. And the intent was to simultaneously address the issue of speculation, which we saw as contributing to the rising costs of housing, and to support public education. So the mechanism would have been to impose a surcharge on non-owner occupied residences valued at over $2 million. So that idea is still, and it has been adopted by some of the counties, but I think that it reflects my interest in addressing speculation as a primary driver in the commodification of land and as a contributor to our rising cost of housing that we seem unable to check. And I think that until we really get at speculation, we're going to be really powerless, and also to address the power of developers. And I'm hoping that Tina will talk a little bit about the work that she has been doing and that she discusses in her Civil Beat article today. But I really wanted to focus on a couple of measures. HB 148, we introduced this session. It's a biennium, so it's still alive. It's a conveyance tax surcharge, and it imposes a surcharge of 3% for any property that has been left vacant for 180 days or more. And I think we see that in many communities where we see outside investors come in and the property appreciates in value regardless of whether or not the home is occupied. So to incentivize the provision of those sources of housing to our local community members, this conveyance tax surcharge would be one mechanism. Another mechanism is addressing the estate tax. So we currently provides what is called a reciprocity exemption, a reciprocal exemption with all property owners in other states. So for example, if an estate is investing its wealth in property here, so as to accrue profit, then when that person passes, then there is no estate tax that's paid. And this measure, HB 151, would eliminate that reciprocal exemption so that we would be able to collect those estate taxes. And I think that in other jurisdictions that have similar issues with property speculation, it's been a powerful mechanism to check speculation, such as New York. And the third thing I really wanted to kind of give to you as a problem, because I haven't figured out a legislative solution, and that is the military impact on our housing. And I'll just briefly describe it. And that is, you know, in Wahiawa, we're essentially surrounded by the military, and they do not provide adequate housing for their members. They provide COLA for folks to live off base. And this COLA is about double what our community members pay in housing. So it radically distorts the housing market in my community, and in more than one way, not just that kind of initial, you know, what they're able to offer, but what happens is we see active duty military members come off base, come together with a couple of their peers and be able to rent or even sometimes buy a home. And then they are able to pocket the difference. So money that was intended to help them seek basic housing, right? Not luxury housing, not at the expense of our local communities, is then they're able to extract a profit, and they're taking housing away from our local community members. So I think that, you know, because again, this is an ongoing conversation with our local bases and the commanders of the bases, and really getting at their competence in terms of being able to provide the housing that they're supposed to be providing for their members so that they don't have to live in the community. I think that it's a non-legislative discussion, but I wanted you folks to be able to kind of incorporate that into your understanding, because I think that it also affects our local communities. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you very much. All right, and then Tina Grandinetti. Thank you, Tina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I actually manage the office for Representative Amy Perruso, but I also have a PhD in urban studies from RMIT University in Australia, and I'm a research affiliate of the Center for Urban Research and UCLA's Unequal Cities Network. So housing is kind of my passion, and particularly looking at the way that tenants play into this issue. In Hawaii, roughly 40% of households are renters, and yet we still, we tend not to look at renters when we talk about housing policy. Instead, policy has focused on almost entirely on how to build more housing faster, typically by removing regulatory protections for workers, for the environment, for public transparency, for historical and cultural resources. This session at the legislature, we saw several bills that sought to exempt affordable housing projects from, for example, the Hawaii Environmental Policy Act, that aimed to weaken the Land Use Commission's authority over developments with actually as little as 25% of their units set aside as workforce or affordable housing. And that's a particularly important issue because, I mean, if you consider that workforce and affordable housing is defined as housing that's affordable to households making as much as 140% median income. So that's almost roughly $133,000 for a family of 4 in Honolulu. We also saw recently the city council waive $12 million in permitting fees for a project by Kobayashi Group that promised this like similar levels of affordable housing. And so actually, I think that Republicans and Democrats tend to be on the same page when it comes to deregulation. And I think that's an issue because we can look to actual examples of how this plays out. You know, we can look at Kaka'ako, where the main drive of that development was to facilitate private development, and had originally been intended to provide workforce housing, but we all kind of know that it has been mostly successful at producing luxury housing that is used as investments for foreign investors and out-of-state investors. We've also seen the Eva Plain, where we paved over agricultural lands to build housing, even though roughly a quarter of new home purchases are made by out-of-state buyers. So we're so focused on building housing inventory, but we haven't really addressed the fact that the housing is not going to the people who need it. And the people who manage to have affordable housing now are watching their rents rise at a rate that our wages can't keep up with. So it's true that any comprehensive housing strategy needs to build more units, more affordable housing units. But we're so focused on that, we're completely missing another element of this issue, which is that we have to find a way to ensure that existing units stay affordable and to stop displacement before it happens. So our office, Rep Peruso, introduced 2 bills this session: House Bill 1338, which would have established rent regulation and protected tenants from arbitrary lease non-renewals, and House Bill 1339, which would have extended the notice periods for landlords when they intend to raise the rent or terminate a lease. And so these 2 bills just give pretty modest protections for renters, many of whom are just one rent hike away from displacement. And I think that the most contentious one, both of these bills died without a hearing, but I think the most contentious one would have been House Bill 1338, which would have implemented rent regulation. And that is because for decades, real estate and development interests have really maligned those kinds of policies. And yet we've seen in recent years this nationwide move by states and cities and municipalities to actually implement rent regulation or expand existing rent controls. And that's because, you know, it's an effective way to limit property speculation, to benefit incumbent renters, people who already live here, increase overall neighborhood stability, and it still allows landlords to make a healthy profit. And of course, in Hawaii, they're always going to see their assets appreciate in value. The other element of that bill would have been essentially requiring landlords to give their tenants the option to renew a lease as long as they have not violated the terms of that lease. So as long as they've been a good tenant when their lease comes up for a renewal, they have that right. And it prevents arbitrary evictions, meaning that it just gives tenants a very like a modicum of housing stability. It lets local families kind of have a sense of security that the house that they're renting, they're not gonna be given 45 days before they have to pack up and leave and search for a new unit in our already like extremely tight housing market. So I think, I know these policies have not been very popular, but I also know as a renter, as a young person for whom home ownership is completely off the table, that these are realistic policy approaches that we can take to have a very direct positive benefit on the lives of the 40% of Hawaii households that rent instead of own.
All right, thank you very much, Tina. All right, we're going to open up to Q&A, but I just want to point out a couple of things. I live in Kaka'ako. I'm not an investor. And although I did originally come from Japan, I've lived here for 65 years now. And when people drive by and they talk about the dark windows at night of Kaka'ako, I'm included. Because if you can see behind me, my main wall is a window. And so I'm not going to leave the lights on at night so everyone can watch me from outside. So I just want to disabuse some of the common thinking about Kaka'ako. The other thing too is that because of my background in banking, I'm well aware that people in Hawaii, in order to purchase a home, spend up to 50% of their income. So it's not just that renters are, overextended. Even to own a home, we have to overextend ourselves. All right, Doug, I see your hand up. You're on.
I guess this question is to either Amy or Tina. I think I'm the only renter in the Kokua Council Board of Directors. So talk about being a minority, it's like worse than being like a Republican, I think, in the ledge. And I'll have a question for Diamond later, but this question is about rentals. I know there were those, I was following those two rental proposals bills, and of course they died. And then there's a kind of a companion Senate bill, and of course that died. And I wanted to point out, I'm 70 years old. I'm working full-time, getting early Social Security. I'm a renter. I got a great landlady who's an older person too. I'm living in the house that she grew up in. So I got local kind rent control. I'm an old guy. She's not going to raise the rent on me, or if she does, going to be a little bit. You know what I mean? But that's less and less the case as different owners come in for reasons of making a profit. Now, rent control. And then I wanted to mention, because Nani and Diamond are here, in 2014, I was homeless for a little while. And that's where I met a lot of Hawaiians, so I get to tell people, yeah, for a little while, I lived in a Hawaiian neighborhood. I was homeless. And that's really shameful, I think. It's kind of offensive that Hawaiians can be homeless in their homeland. Anyway, okay, I don't want to make this too long. My question really is, let me share the screen. Is that, I don't know if you can see the screen, but this is a picture of, I'm sorry. It was a picture of Western Europe. Some people say that lack of rent control is because we have a very haole system. But most of Western Europe has rent control. Germany, Switzerland, Austria, all the Scandinavian countries. So my question is, what the heck prevents any kind of expectation of a rent control measure to even get heard and discussed in Hawaii? And that goes to either Tina or Amy.
I can start, but then I'll need Tina to pick it up because I'm not feeling well. But I'll just say that I think there is a different history. There was a stronger labor movement, a stronger workers movement in Europe, and particularly in places, for example, if you consider the Vienna model of social housing, that was really undergirded by really strong social movements and workers movements. So I think that in the United States and in Hawaii, while we have had some of that, and in Hawaii we've had our labor history is important, the outcomes have been different, and we don't see the real interest in working class people, or real support for working class people is what I would say, like actual tangible support for working class people in our policies. And that's one real important way in which we differ from Scandinavia and the rest of Europe. And Tina, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Sure. I agree with all of that. I also think, like, you know, growing up here, my parents are landlords too. I think that we, like you said, Doug, you have like local kind rent control. I think that a lot of us, we understand that investing in property is one of the ways that our families make sure they can stay here if they have the means to do that. And a lot of us have been lucky enough to have landlords who are, you know, local folks. And we kind of accept that as, I mean, hopefully many of us have been lucky enough to experience a landlord who is fair and who who acknowledges that when we rent, that's also like our home. But I think that, so I feel like in some ways, tenants haven't advocated for themselves either for some of those reasons, but it's important that we do, partially because even mom and pop landlords, you know, have vastly more power than the tenants who rent from them, but also because, like you said, the faces of who our landlords are changing very rapidly. Out-of-state investors are buying up homes, so many of us will never ever know our landlords anymore. Also, corporations are investing in multifamily residential developments and entering into the rental market in like very, very rapidly. So I think that when we look, because, you know, rent control and just cause eviction measures, they're not just a European thing either. California has them, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, Washington, DC, all of these places on the continent have implemented these measures or expanded existing measures because tenants have been organizing, because what's happening in Hawaii now has been happening there for a lot longer. So they've kind of seen that necessity. So yeah, I think that's my answer for, like, on a more individual level, why maybe we haven't seen the kinds of tenant organizing that other places have.
All right, thank you very much. Helen, your question? You're muted. Helen, you're muted.
It used to be the American dream to come to America and buy a home and raise your family. But because of what's going on here in Hawaii, a lot of seniors sold their homes in order to help the younger generation buy a home. And they moved into condos, or what they thought were, quote, and they said it here, affordable housing that turned out to be luxury facilities. And now the senior who is on fixed income, as their property gets older, they're assessed for improvements. Their maintenance fees sometimes are even bigger than their mortgage fees. Their land rental that are leases that they put on have also just jeopardized the future for them. Because of all the, even now you said that most of the condos that are being made are luxury. We're out pricing people that they can't live here in Hawaii. Look at how many people are leaving Hawaii, not just the young, but the old seniors, because they can't afford it. The writing is on the wall. There should be some look at the bylaws that is given to these eager buyers, that they see all the assessments that are there. They should also be re-looked at or revisited by a panel of fairness, because right now it's all to the benefit of the government. People that don't pay the assessments, and they're big assessments, like $75,000 all of a sudden they're hit with. And the rules, one group was telling me that they were assessed $75,000 because they're going to redo their lanais, and their lanais don't need it because they've been maintaining them. but then their board tells them, well, you didn't get approval, so you have to undo what you've done in trying to keep up with your property and do it our way. And the funds that are allocated through the homeowners associations.
I'm sorry
Again,
to interrupt, Helen, but do you have a question? Thank you. Do you have a question?
well, what can we do to revisit the bylaws on the property owners that are not renting, but belong to all of these associations?
Is this an open question for anyone or someone in particular?
Anyone?
Would anyone like to respond? Choon, go ahead.
I think, can you hear me? Great. So this idea of our seniors or our long-term residents being priced out is very real. I see it every day. And in the case of AOAO, I also understand it has its own class of problems and complications. The board of directors are so powerful. And unless all the residents are in there participating, which of course some cannot do when they're working 2 jobs, or you have to take care of family members and this and that. So it actually tends to lean towards those people who are more affluent, or those who are out of state. We can also talk about proxy votes too. There's another day or seminar there. But I hear you that it is a very troublesome situation, because now your maintenance fees are higher than the mortgage that you were paying. And so, that is certainly something that has to be addressed. The only real life scenario here is also that when a condominium building is first developed, it's nice, brand new, everything is in working order. But when the building, reaches 20 years old, 30 years old, the elevator starts to go, the plumbing starts to crumble, the rebars in the building start to have spotting. And so the cost of maintenance inevitably goes up. So yes, I hear you. It's a concern that has to be dealt with. But I feel that people who stay there, the owner occupants who stay there, really should have a bigger say than investors or proxy voters.
All right. Thank you, Choon. And I'm going to remind everyone, this is a Q&A. So while I appreciate your comments, I'm sure everybody else does too. If we could limit our comments, and if we could limit our responses to about 3 minutes, just to allow more questions and more discussion. And by the way, you panelists, you 5 may ask each other questions too. You don't just have to respond to ours. Okay, thank you. Okay, Rick, you had your hand up.
I have a question of my own, but I do see in the chat, excuse me, I have a cold. Kate is asking, can any invited address the large landowners' influence on high cost of housing? That's open to anyone. Then I have one of my own. Can somebody answer that for Kate? Does that make sense? So, landlords' influence on high cost of housing.
Those large landowners, I think probably talking about stuff like Bishop Estate and like those large holders, I think.
Is that what you're saying, Kate? Okay. Does anybody have a thought on that?
We can come back to it. Maybe Rick, if you want to ask your question.
I'll ask mine. So I rented for a very long time. I'm very fortunate. Family helped us actually. And actually my wife moved to Seattle and a studio became a house in Seattle, which now has become the family home. But in our neighborhood, in the past couple of years, we've had 6 major fires. There have been deaths, and it always comes out that it's electrical. So what I've noticed with rentals is the upkeep isn't there. What can we do? Because it's not safe. What's going on right now is not safe. It's not about the fire alarm. It's the electrical itself. And people can't afford to upgrade it, I imagine. But as lawmakers, as folks that are actually working in the rental industry, I'm really concerned because 6 fires in the last 2 years, when I haven't had a fire in my lifetime nearby me, really concerns me. These are really, really old homes that were built in the 30s. What can we do to help people out, make it safer? That's open to anyone. Thank you. All right, I'll direct it. Amy, how about you?
I was going to answer. Honestly, I would say that we need to have more regulation of rental properties. And right now, I think that we haven't been investing enough in that area. And I think that a lot of renters are really stuck in subhuman living conditions.
Yes, exactly.
Because we don't have that regulatory oversight. And I think that in that way, we're failing our working families who are living in rentals and just trying to survive. And they're afraid to say anything oftentimes because they fear eviction. And I think that kind of gets to what Tina was talking about earlier, is that they don't have any legal protections. They have very few legal protections. So we have had a modicum of protection introduced over the course of the pandemic, but ultimately all the power lies with the landowner. And so renters are very reticent, very reluctant to raise those kinds of issues, even if there's safety concerns, even if they affect like health and human safety. If the choice is like living on the street or dealing with this unsafe condition, they're going to continue to deal with unsafe condition. So in my mind, that means that we need to do a better job regulating the rental, the whole rental context.
Right. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think, Doug, you were next with your question.
Yeah, I have another question. This is to Nani Medeiros, and thanks so much for coming here. Your new position has an incredible potential, but it also makes it like a super hot seat, right? So, and I appreciate that. I want to ask a question that kind of somebody asked me to ask, and this is concerning you know, the governor's emergency proclamations, which cuts, well, it's supposed to cut through red tape, but this concerns the iwi kupuna, the burial sites that are encountered. And for everyone here that may not be familiar, these are Hawaiian burials. They're not people that just died and fell into the ground. These were people that were buried according to their tradition in areas designated for burial, without the foreknowledge that land tenancy and that sort of stuff would change and would not respect the burial site. So my question is, with those laws kind of temporarily suspended under the emergency proclamation, how will these burials be safeguarded, protected?
Okay, thanks, Doug. So 2 things, I guess, real quick is both the current draft of the emergency proclamation for affordable housing. I'm going to speak to that one because James is the one who's responsible for the EP on homelessness, and he knows more of those details than I do. But for the EP on affordable housing, the suspension of both Chapter 6E and 343 is very limited in its current scope in the current draft to just affordable housing projects. And in the case of actually the way the 343 exemption is currently worded, it's only for affordable housing projects that are actually redevelopment or reconstruction of an existing building, facility, housing project. It's replacing it. And it's in the general same area, and the new purpose will be the same purpose as before. So it has to be a replacement essentially of housing for housing, and it's affordable housing. So it's very limited. I don't know if we're going, like I said earlier, I'm still working on drafts with the AG. And to be honest with you, my 2 main concerns are 6E and 343. And I don't want there to be some blanket suspension. I also don't want EPs that have to go on for years, like the previous administration did. We would love for the legislature to entertain perhaps, you know, 4 or 5 years of something and then sunset it and see what we can do. I am Native Hawaiian, so I feel very strongly about both the protection of iwi kupuna and the role of SHPD, and ensuring that SHPD is an agency that can function well and efficiently and be supported the way they need to be supported for the work that they do. So I hope that answers your question, Doug. We're not going to be putting forward some blanket, 60 is gone, 343 is gone. And also within the emergency proclamation, there is a provision that actually from the emergency powers statute chapter in HRS 1, I think it's 127, authorizes the governor to make appointments of officers or other employees. So the EP also establishes my position, the chief housing officer. And one of the things I'm talking through right now with some of our staff here is should we bring on more staff, to your point. And I also want to make sure that we create some kind of a system and a process that evaluates affordable housing projects that want to come through under the EP. And that process or system be more than just the chief housing officer, that it include the appropriate members for review, recommendations, approval. If we're going to, if, for example, if there is, for whatever reason, a project qualifies for whatever the final language in the EP is for suspending part of 6E or the processes of 6E, I would still want somebody from SHPD or somebody from the Island Burial Council that this project is located on whatever team that we decide to assemble to review these project applications. I would still want somebody with that area of expertise at the table helping to review that project and give their input. Yeah, so I don't have the final process. I can't tell you what that exactly looks like, but I can tell you what my intention is and what my intention is not.
Thank you very much. And we have it on video. So there you go. On the record.
Thank you very much. Dale, you're next. Dale, you're.
Oh, there. Yeah, sorry for my delay in getting this camera going here. 2 simple questions. Number 1, both the House and the Senate have committees devoted to commerce and consumer protection, which in fact are consumer exploitation and commerce protection. We're not getting a fair shakedown at the Capitol. We're getting beat up every year. It's not ever ending. So simple question 2 I have. 1 is, would you introduce a bill to create a standalone committee for consumer protection? That's a simple yes or no question. Second question, real fast. HOA voting rights were truncated in 2005 under Linda Lingo at the request of the lobbyists, making the right to cast your own vote conditional that you have to be at a meeting. It's very unfair to investors and people who are mobility challenged or disabled. They can't be there. And these proxies, as hinted at by Choon James, well, they've been weaponized, okay? So we need to undo that conditional voting nonsense in the HRS 514B123. So would you support a voting rights bill for the HOA community? That would take the pressure off of housing increases in cost, because it would give it back to the members of those HOAs to increase or hold the brakes on these robber baron fees increases. Again, so number 1, would you go along with separating commerce from consumer protection committee? And number 2, would you go and help introduce yet again another voting rights bill for the HOA community? Thank you.
Dale, who are you directing your question to?
Oh, anyone. Well, I heard from Choon. So let's ask Mr. Garcia.
Sure. The first question. Sorry, what was your first question again?
The House and Senate both have consumer and
Oh, yes.
committee. And
So
being up
to your
so bad,
first,
we have to separate the committee.
Right.
These are
Okay.
down
So
numbers.
to
We
your
don't
first question,
level playing field.
okay. To your first question, no. To your second question, yes.
Fair answer.
Does anyone else want to answer that? Okay, Greg, your question is next.
Aloha, everyone. Let me put my hand down while I speak. So earlier, Choon mentioned that, our maintenance fees, I live in a condo in Waikiki, and our maintenance fees are continuing to increase rapidly, faster than we can keep up with them. I purchased in 2019, I was paying under $600 in maintenance fees for a 1-bedroom. I'm currently paying just about $1,000 a month. So in just a few short years, the maintenance fee has gone up considerably. But what I see now, and I talk to a lot of people, and I'm involved in a lot of the legislative process this year, and the different hearings, I'm seeing we're getting to a crisis level. So what I'd like to ask any of you who could step up to answer this is, do any of you feel that we're at a crisis level? And if so, what do you propose that we can do today? I don't think we have another year or two to wait to address the situation. I actually think it's urgent.
I'll answer that. I was actually hoping that the governor's emergency proclamation would include protection for renters, including just cause measures and the introduction of the idea of rent control, because I think our renters are the most vulnerable. And while I will say that my community is less, because my district is not as urban as downtown Honolulu, we don't have as many condos. We do, that there is some of that in my district. And we have seen the increase in those maintenance fees, which, I will say that the management companies are very strong and have a lot of lobbying force. And I think that the other piece I would mention, like besides emergency measures being introduced or being taken by the governor, I would say that right now you can get involved in your management leadership. And I know we're having discussion about voting on those boards, but those boards have a lot of power and they make decisions on your behalf. And I would strongly recommend getting back and connecting with your neighbors and pushing back on some of the policies with which you don't agree.
Thank you, Amy. All right, Doug, your question.
Yeah, this goes actually to Diamond, but anyone else can answer it too. I agree. One party, Hawaii has one party. You can't really have a functional democracy with one party. So I notice a lot of people running as Republicans. My problem is that ideologically, I'm not a Republican. On the other hand, so what do? What is the answer? Well, for instance, I went to Germany this past summer. Their national government, they have 5 parties, strong parties in their national government. The current government is a coalition of 3 parties, including the Greens. They get a lot done. There's a lot of discussion of policy. There's a lot of back and forth transparency. Hawaii has basically one party. And I think with one party, you make all kinds of deals and you can't really have anything resembling a democracy. So I'm asking Diamond as a minority, what can you do if you're not a Republican?
Well, great question. And like you mentioned, a one-party rule, regardless of what party that is just not good for democracy. It's not good for society. It's crucially important to have checks and balances, healthy debate and dialogue. What's interesting is here in the House, we are a super minority. There's a 51 state reps, just 6 of us in our caucus. So we're a super minority, and most times our bills won't get heard. They won't even see a hearing just because we're in the minority. It's important to establish balance here in Hawaii. One party rule breeds corruption, which we've seen. I mean, there's one senator and one rep who's currently in prison because one party rule breeds corruption. I've sat here for the last hour and heard different solutions to various problems, but what's interesting is the same ideology is still there. We've been talking about solving Hawaii's housing crisis for decades upon decades, and yet I keep hearing, let's increase taxes. In fact, there's House Bill 1211 to increase the conveyance tax for what they call luxury homes. And I often say, I mean, $1.5 million is not luxury here in Hawaii. The average house is almost $1.5 million. So you're going to be hurting so much local families and taking profit away. Our solution is simply this: shrink the size of government. Our local families are packing up and leaving Hawaii to red states, Texas, Arizona, Nevada, where there's no income tax, where they can actually work, keep their money, and buy a home. Florida, lots of local families are packing up and moving to Florida. Just last week, my cousin, his wife, and 2 kids just moved to Florida because there's more opportunity, there's less government. And the more we grow the size of government here in Hawaii, the more regulations and red tape we put onto local businesses and local residents. They just can't survive here, and they're packing up and moving. All of these big blue states, New York, California, Washington, they've all seen a decline in state population. Why? Because their policies don't work. We've seen 70 years, guys, 70 years of one party rule here in Hawaii, and more Hawaiians live on the mainland than in Hawaii. That's embarrassing. We need to change the way we run this state. Let's cut taxes. I mean, it boggles my mind, guys. We have a $2.6 billion surplus, yet we're here in the building trying to increase taxes. $2.6 billion in surplus, which was not foreseen by the Council on Revenues. What does that mean? We're overtaxing our people. What we should be doing here is passing bills to cut taxes, give money back to people, let them survive. But we're doing just the exact opposite. And if we continue in this direction, our housing crisis will only worsen in the years ahead.
Mahalo, Diamond. And I see Betty Lou with a question.
Hi, aloha. This question is for Nani Medeiros. Nani, besides the Kahali model, are there other models that you're looking at to lower the cost of affordable, especially affordable rentals? Or, because one thing is the barriers to it, but the other thing is the actual cost of construction. Is there anything you see as a focus for that?
Sure. Thanks, Betty Lou, and hi, good to see you. I feel like I see you all the time now. There's, Kauhali has traditionally only been talked about as a way to address housing for our neighbors experiencing homelessness. I think that it is starting to be discussed in other areas, such as a way to address very, very low income housing for the right demographic. Okay, but it doesn't necessarily just have to be something that's addressing homelessness anymore. There's definitely a look on James's side of our housing initiatives to look into more permanent supportive housing to address homelessness. Over on my side, which is everything up above that to workforce housing, I think we'd like to consider looking at, what I would phrase as non-traditional models. So, 3D printing houses, modulars, prefabs, homes that can be done in production and be able to save costs on that because you're producing them on a large basis. So yeah, Betty Lou, we're definitely looking at other types of construction, other types of housing. And then I think what the legislature is continuing to do is explore tweaking some of the financing tools that are available to really target some funding towards people on the much lower end of the income spectrum, 60% AMI below, 30% AMI and below. So I see those, how those two very different things, the construction and the type of housing and the financing support tools that are out there can be leveraged together to maybe support getting more people into different kinds of housing. But it's a really, even if we go down that route successfully, it's still going to be very complex in implementation. Just want to manage expectations.
And is there a look at maybe possibly what the process needs to be? I remember a discussion, I think it was about modular homes, that to be really scale it up, you need to have the ability to produce it here. You need a factory or what, I'm not sure what the terminology is, and that would create jobs, but you need to have something not necessarily shipped in. Are those possibilities, or are those realistically being considered? And then the process to actually achieve that might be different than our regular construction methods.
Yeah, they are definitely being considered by me and our core team. I don't have any staff yet, but when I do, we'll be able to sort of ramp up our efforts and look in a lot more detail. But yes, I am seriously looking at those. You are correct in that we would look to create factories across the state or utilize existing factories and partner with folks that have that industrial space maybe to lend the state to be able to mass produce locally. And that's hopefully we can have a really great and productive conversation with our building trades to get them behind this as a way of partnering with us and hopefully come up with a solution where it's not viewed as something where we're taking work away from them, but maybe they can be the ones that are maybe they're building the factory for us. Maybe they can change their skill sets and adapt and be able to do these different types of builds as well. We do need a workforce pipeline to be able to build as much as we want to build. And we're going to need some help with that in developing that workforce pipeline, which will be it'll include existing trades and skill sets, but also the new ones like 3D printing. So.
Thank you very much. Tina, your hand is up.
Yeah, if it's okay, I just wanted to answer Dawn's question in the chat. She had 3. So the first question, I just want to say, yes, rent control does benefit renters at the cost of a portion of the landlord's potential profit. That is true. But I think we have to ask whether we have to consider whether we are going to start prioritizing helping those who rely on housing as shelter or those who rely on units to produce a profit. Because yeah, we have programs to assist renters that are paid for by taxpayers. Those monies go directly to the landlords. Like I mentioned earlier, we also subsidize development. The city council just waived $12 million in permitting fees for Kobayashi Group, which is a very wealthy developer. And even with modest rent regulation, landlords are still going to make a profit, but we kind of have to make a value choice here. Like if we really think about addressing the housing crisis, I think we're talking about curbing the rise of housing costs. And there's a contradiction there that if we limit the skyrocketing cost of housing, that's going to eat into landlords' profits. But if we're serious about stopping displacement and lowering the cost of living, that's a choice that we have to make. And I know that's uncomfortable. And I think that's why we have never adequately addressed this crisis. To the second question, yes, rent control has, it hasn't solved the homeless crisis, but it's been studied and shown to have benefits that reach further than the direct renters who are in those units. So a 2003 study of New Jersey and California found that cities with rent regulations had 10% lower growth in median rents than cities without rent regulations. And a 2000 study showed that when rent regulation abruptly ended in Boston, Cambridge, and Brookline, Massachusetts, rents in both regulated and unregulated units jumped up. So we can see that rent regulation improves affordability for tenants in both rent regulated and non-rent regulated units. And yes, that's a benefit to renters, not landlords. But I also think that landlords benefit from neighborhood stability. We always talk about how Hawaii is changing so quickly. The Hawaii that we love is changing. And I think that if we're serious about protecting that, then landlords stand to benefit from this too. And then to the third question, yes, most rent regulation measures include exceptions for when a landlord has to make repairs and things like that. And I would advocate for that to be included as well, because habitability and safety is an important issue.
Thank you, Tina. All right, so we have two more questions, one from Doug and one from Frances, and then we'll have to wrap up. Thank you very much. Okay, Doug, you're up.
Yeah, question to, I guess, both our representatives, anyone, but especially, I guess, to Amy and Diamond. Some states have rent control, and I'm stuck on rent control. I'm sorry. Some states have rent control, and some states also allow cities to have rent control. Notoriously, Berkeley, California, sometimes called the People's Republic of Berkeley. How do you feel about allowing the county's power to regulate rent to some degree?
I can go ahead and start us off, but because I've given this some thought, and I do think that that's a legitimate level of governance to start at, because they're closest to that community and they are the ones who are using property tax, right? So the state does not collect property tax, and so it does seem logical and rational to allow the counties to engage in rent control. I think for us, we weren't seeing that happen. So we wanted to start the conversation at the state level. But I think that the level doesn't matter as much as the actual implementation. And even if it starts in one county and then moves to other counties, as both the local community and the elected see the benefits, because, I think at some point the community just gets frustrated with people running for office saying, the sky is falling and, there's nothing we can do about it. They really want practical solutions. And I think that rent control is a clear way to help keep our local communities in their homes and stable, right? And to give them some power. And I think that it is really about shifting the power balance. So whether that happens at the county or the state level, I'm ambivalent, but just as long as it starts.
Thank you, Doug. I'm not a big fan of a government control, if you couldn't tell. But I do believe that there is a need for some regulation in this area. I think my approach would be more of tax incentives for not going over a certain limit with the rental charges. But I would definitely be more in favor of letting the counties handle this issue, because they know their communities best, and versus the state passing something being blanket for the whole state and not realizing that each community is different and their needs are different. So I would be open to having that conversation, but I believe it's a lot more feasible and viable on the county level.
Terrific, thanks.
All right, I thought there was one more question.
Yes, Frances Harimoto.
Thank you, Frances.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This question is for Tina and also Diamond, if you could chime in. This is in regards to the transient population we have here, both with professionals moving to our island, whether they're working remotely. We saw that a lot post-pandemic, but also the unhoused from other states affecting the homeless population here in Hawaii as well. I'd like for you both to address that conversation, if you could, briefly.
So Frances, your question was first to Tina, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. In terms of the transient houseless population, from my conversations with housing providers, homeless service providers, I feel like many of them take issue with that. They kind of say that that's a bit of an exaggeration, or like misconception of how much of the houseless population is not from here. But I also know that there have been bills in the legislature this session to do a pilot program to provide houseless folks who want to return to the mainland with airfare to do that. So you might want to take a look at those bills. I haven't really thought through my position on that myself, but I know those bills exist. And then in terms of remote workers, I definitely think about this a lot. And this is one of the reasons why I think rent regulation is important, because studies, even many of the studies that take issue with rent regulation, all of them generally agree that where it has clear benefits is to existing renters. And so if we're concerned about remote workers and people, like new transplants coming here and taking up housing stock, rent regulation and just cause eviction measures are one of the ways that we can shape policy to benefit the people who already live here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina, for your insight. Diamond, if you want to take it.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Frances, for the question. The first part about those who are moving here and working remotely, we live in 2023, and lots of jobs are now transitioning to lots of virtual work, online work, and remote work. So, I mean, I think that's a problem that's going to be growing in the next 5, 10, 15 years, which we're going to have to face and address. The issue about homeless who are coming here from out of state, that's been an issue for a long time. I mean, I was raised homeless growing up for parts of my life, and we came into contact with some people who were from, the East Coast, and we asked them, how'd you get here? Well, their state flew here or bused them to LA and then put them on a plane to Hawaii, and they just never left because it's warmer here, it's easier here, and they then use our welfare system, food stamp system, and then we foot the bill. Tina did mention there are a couple bills this session that's looking at having a pilot program that's already started, but they're trying to put it on the state level to where we can basically also find them one-way tickets back to where they came from. I do support that. I think that it's time to, if you're not from Hawaii and you're not working and being a taxpayer and not productive, you should not be here. I mean, it's time to send you back to where you came from, because we cannot keep paying for people that's not being productive to our society and allowing other states to rip us off and send us their problems.
Thank you very much. So this ends our question and answer period. And I'd like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to make a closing statement. If you could please limit that closing statement to about 2 minutes. I'll start with, Diamond, you're up first.
Okay. Thank you once again to the Kokua Council and to my fellow panelists for this discussion. I think this is what democracy is all about: having open discussion, hearing different point of views, and coming to the best conclusion. We should not shy away from other viewpoints or ideologies, so thank you so much. Once again, being the minority here, our position is pretty simple. Let's cut taxes, cut the size of government, reduce regulations, and let our economy thrive here in Hawaii. Once again, I'm going to go down to the root cause here. The root cause is Hawaii is way too expensive. Why? Because we have high taxes and our government is way too big. It's time to cut taxes, let people keep their own money. In other states like Texas, Florida, Nebraska, where there's no income tax, what you see is this: when they cut income tax, the liberals are all screaming, well, there's not going to be no revenue for various programs. But in all those states who have cut income tax, they've seen a boom in revenue because people then spend money, create businesses. And so more tax revenue comes in when you let people keep their own money. It's a basic concept. It worked during the 80s. It's time to bring that kind of thinking here to Hawaii, because if we don't change directions, 70 years of failed policies, if we don't change directions, I'm sorry, but in 20, 30 years, we might have less than 200,000 Hawaiians living in Hawaii. That's a problem. It must be addressed. And thank you once again, guys, for this discussion. Aloha.
Thank you, Diamond. All right, Nani, your closing statement, please.
Thanks for having me, guys. My focus and my mandate is very specific, and it is housing. Delivering more and doing what the government can to reduce the cost of housing. And I'm going to stay focused on that. You folks are welcome to reach out to me via email or text or call if you have any further suggestions or just, want to talk story about what the plans are and how we're doing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nani. All right, Choon, your closing statement.
Aloha, thank you so much. I have refrained from talking too much this session here, but to me, diversification of thoughts and robust dialogue, give and take, is always very important in any decision making. And a landlord needs a tenant, and a tenant needs a landlord. And again, we should question everything. We should question the status quo. We should ask for the bottom line. And above all, we really need to put our residents first. That is the most important. We really need to put the residents first. We're talking about housing. Who are we obligated to help with housing and rentals and so forth? Thank you so much. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Choon. Okay, Amy, your closing statement, please.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk story on this issue. I feel really honored and humbled. And I just want to reiterate, my focus is and has been on trying to check speculation and trying to remind folks that housing is a human right. And while we may be in the midst of incredible commodification of housing, I think it's just really important to pull back and to think about that and what it means for our communities, and to really center those that are most vulnerable, and those I consider to be our houseless community and our renters, and to work up from there. And we have a lot of tools at our disposal. I think in particular, lawmakers have not used the various tools they have to check the power of developers or speculators. And I think that we should, but we are only empowered to do so by the community. So it's really incumbent on the community to get active and to get involved and to make the government work for you. So I would say that that's one of the powers of this kind of conversation, is to make that possible. So I'm grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And Tina, your closing statement, please.
Basically echoing what Rep Peruso said. I'm very grateful for this conversation. It's like Choon said, actually, we have to just crack everything open and not be afraid to talk about every solution on the table. And I'm really happy to see that people are starting, things are shifting and people are ready to talk about rent regulation and tenant protections. And yeah, that we should be centering the people who depend on our housing units for literal shelter, and on those who don't have that privilege. So centering tenants, centering houseless, centering Hawaiians, and always remembering that, we live on Hawaiian lands. Those would be my priorities. But thank you again for having me.
Thank you very much to all our guests and our panelists. This was a very interesting discussion, many different points of view, but I'm glad to see that we could have a friendly discussion, even if we came from so many different angles. And I hope we can continue this again in the future. And as for all panelists, please expect to hear from us, because we do have questions, we do need your help, and we appreciate your outreach to our community. Thank you very much. This ends our program for today. Please stay well and we'll be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Aloha, thank you. Thank you very much.